Welcome to the Omega Particle Podcast. I am your gracious and humble host, Jonathan Wiegand. So happy to be back. And today we have a real treat. This is a unknown story, really, in the most recent Star Trek world. Not a lot of people know about this. It came across my desk, being the anchorman of the Federation and all, probably a couple weeks ago. And I was like, oh, this would be a lot of fun. It's taken me a while to read through the book, but this deep dive into the Star Trek movie Insurrection and why it's so terrible and a lot of behind the scenes stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to deep dive into that with you today. But before we do, we have some housekeeping notes. And not only housekeeping notes, just want to just make a statement. I know the world right now is a lot of turmoil. There's been presidential assassination that just happened a couple days ago. It's just been a lot of topsy-turvy stuff. And I was sitting there watching, I think it was just an episode of DS9, and my wife came down and she started talking to me about, like, hey, why do you like Star Trek so much? What draws you to Star Trek? Like, I know it's a lot of fun. You get emotionally attached to these characters and you have a lot of episodes and history to go off of, which is great, and a lot of depth to these wonderful characters and shows. But I was explaining to her, it's also like a hopeful aspect to the show, because in science fiction, there's a lot of dystopian futures. We have Terminator comes to mind, Blade Runner. We just saw Mad Max a couple weeks ago, the new Mad Max movie. It's Planet of the Apes. You have Soylent Green, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Westworld, all of these dystopian style shows and movies. And it just kind of shows how the human race eventually just degrades. And with Star Trek, it's the exact opposite. Star Trek fixes everything. We reach a point with First Contact, we're like, hey, we're bigger than ourselves. There's a universe out there. And so they fix through technology. There's no war, there's no greed, there's no more pursuit of anything except expanding oneself. And that's kind of a cool thing. Now, I'm not a big humanist, but it is nice to see, like, hey, there's hope out there. Like, we may fix this and maybe things will get better as opposed to getting worse. And so that is a deep dive into my comfort show and why I like it. And so sometimes in this world, we need those comfort shows and we need those hopeful, maybe one day it'll be better. One day it'll get fixed. And so Star Trek offers me that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, and shared across many spectrums and many avenues, but it's a great comfort show. So that is one of the main reasons I like Star Trek. And so I thought I kind of break that down with you guys as well. Also, want to announce, for the first time ever in our 4-year history, we have a official partner. We have partnered up with a company called Nubeo Watches, and they are offering a very cool Star Trek line, which I'm wearing right now. And if you've seen it on my Instagram or other social medias, that is why. And I can't really recommend this product enough. It's very great. I love it. It's a very high quality, high craftsmanship, and I would never promote something that I wouldn't use myself in my daily life. It's going to premiere and be available to everybody on July 26th, so watch out for that. And let me know if you're interested. I have a 50% off discount code that I can give out to a select few people. So if you're really interested in wanting to buy one of these things, which I highly recommend, please let me know. Shoot me a DM or email, wherever you want to, however you want to reach out to me, and do that. So moving on from the housekeeping stuff, let's get into why we are here today. And we are talking about something that Paramount does not want you to know about. And that is this person heavily involved in Star Trek, and we'll get into him. Michael Piller wrote a book called Fade In: From Idea to Final Draft. And it's the story of how he wrote the underrated yet still disappointing film Star Trek Insurrection. It's crazy because it's actually free online. Like, you can find copies of this book because it was unpublished. Because at the time of his writing in 1999, Fade In was apparently very suppressed by Paramount, and it was only released on the internet because it never found a publisher. After the studio lost interest in it, it really never caught wind in the Star Trek world. And we'll get into a bunch of reasons why that could be, but it is considered by this very influential man in Star Trek, Michael Piller, the last great gift to fans and to aspiring writers everywhere. When I meant the last great gift is because He actually died in 2005. You may say, well, John, you've said he's influential, he's great. He's the writer of some of the best episodes of modern Star Trek. I'm talking Booby Trap, Best of Both Worlds, DS9, Emissary, as well hundreds of uncredited rewrites. He was actually an executive producer on a bunch as well. So let's deep dive into Fade In, this amazing unpublished book by this amazing kind of unsung hero in Star Trek. So hopefully we'll shine a light on him today. And Luna, without further ado, let's roll. Where do ideas come from? I'm asked that all the time. The only suggestion I have to give to young writers is to listen to the universe. The ideas are all around you in newspapers and in magazines, from television, stories people tell you, even your own life experiences. Sooner or later, something will resonate. That is a direct quote from this unpublished book, Fade In. And Michael Piller wanted to pitch the book as this unique look inside the writing process of a single feature film. We were going to be right there with him in the trenches as he wrote this script and how to struggle with ideas and refining those ideas, and then getting notes from the actors in the studios and then refining the process again, and then eventually making all the way to the final draft. And it was going to highlight not only the cool background and behind the scenes of Star Trek and how, the sausage is made, but also great advice like that quote I just read for young writers. And that was really the purpose of the book. However, there was a very big problem. Once the book was finished, someone at Paramount, we don't know who, killed the project. They did not like it. It kind of, exposed too much of the internal workings and the process, didn't make certain executives look in the best light, which we'll get into. And it was shelved. And then, unfortunately, like I mentioned, Piller died of cancer in 2005. So the market for this book really fell out as well in continuation of everything else after Insurrection. And it seemed the book would never be deemed profitable. There was actually a website called Trekkie that offered Piller's unpublished manuscript for free. And it's a really, like I mentioned before, it's a really candid look at the process of writing a feature film. And it's just not a book for Trekkies. Let me preference that. It's also a book for writers. So if you have any interest in writing, if you have any interest in kind of expanding your screenplay abilities or writing check this book out. It's really great advice. I took a lot of notes on writing scripts for the podcast, so please check it out. And I mean, I don't know, maybe you have never seen Insurrection, maybe you hate Insurrection. I doubt you love Insurrection. But it doesn't matter. This is a must read. One of the ways that Piller always approached a new project was he wanted to ask questions and make sure those questions were answered. What is this fight about? What is this battle about? What are we trying to convey? What's the purpose? And he wanted this Star Trek film to be about the most horrible, treacherous aliens ever known to man, who are about to destroy life as we know it, and leading to this most spectacular thrill ride of an adventure with these fantastic space battles and huge explosions and great special effects. Just a white knuckle ride that Star Trek films have given. The problem is space battles and all that kind of stuff get lost when they're just kind of senseless. So Piller always wanted to, like I mentioned before, what happens, if the hero loses a battle? What are the stakes? Why should we care? And some of the best Star Trek episodes, Best of Both Worlds, he wrote. And so that really conveys that cliffhanger, like, what happens? Does Picard turn into, are they going to blow up, the Borg cube with Picard on it? Is Picard lost forever? Are they ever going to get him back? Is Riker going to be captain now and Shelby's going to be his first officer? Like, it was just a lot of, probably one of the greatest Trek cliffhangers of all time. So now we're going to move into kind of the story of the first draft of Insurrection. So Michael has been spending a lot of weeks mulling over the ideas, like what do they want the ninth Star Trek to be. Him and producer Rick Berman, who's, if you're into Star Trek, you know that name, sticks out, agreed that previous film, First Contact, which is my favorite Star Trek movie, it's kind of been very dark and featured a very formidable villain in the Borg. And it was just it was a very hopeful movie at the end, but it was very dark and just it was not a very uplifting, happy-go-lucky, cheery film. That's what I mean by dark. And they wanted to go in the opposite direction of that with Insurrection. They were like, hey, let's do something different. And they began with the idea of finding, maybe a public domain story that they can adapt into the Trek universe. In the book, he was like, I was putting Rogaine in my hair. And then he was like, hey, we should do a Fountain of Youth story. And that may be the right way to go. And we're going to kind of marry it to Fountain of Youth married to this adaptation of Heart of Darkness. And he pitched an idea that Picard was sent on, a mission to track down an old friend who has seemingly gone rogue. And when he discovers his friend's hiding place, he'd be like, hey, you're as young as when we were at the academy together. And then the story would evolve and become evident that the friend is actually defending the natives of the planet. And the story again continues to evolve. It kind of turns into a battle of principles, and the planet is supposed to be ceded over to the Romulans via treaty, and Picard learns there's much more to this mission than his superiors have told him. And again, kind of taking a book out of Avatar, is that this planet was going to be entirely composed of a rare mineral that the Federation desperately needs. It also has regenerative abilities that gradually make anyone younger. So Starfleet kind of struck a deal with the Romulans. Hey, we'll give you a planet. You relocate the people. We keep the ore. And this movie was going to be this kind of end run around of Federation principles and a trick to get to the Romulans to do the dirty work for him. And then Picard didn't like that, so he's going to resign in disgust and join his friend on the planet. And they would get younger and younger and younger until they reached 25. And they would defend the planet against the Romulans, eventually defeating them and exposing the public to this idea. I mean, that sounds like a really cool kind of Avatar-ish kind of way of Star Trek, is not only are they getting younger, but there's principles at stake. It's bigger than, the Federation's wrong. We got to correct them. They're kind of being corrupt. I mean, that sounds super exciting, but the problem is that Berman hated it. And he had very strong words about it. He said, Picard's an old man who doesn't get to swashbuckle, and then the planet makes him young again. He's our hero. And so when the movie's over, he's going to go back to normal again. And he needs to be this man of action. And you've made him into to kind of be this old, decrepit person who's like, okay, his swashbuckling days are now over. Now he's going to go back behind a chair. And it's just going to make Patrick Stewart seem really old. And Rick Berman's like, Patrick's going to hate this. He'll never do it. You're telling him he's kind of useless and he's old. We'll get into Sir Patrick Stewart's reaction to the script and what he wanted to do. So since Berman hated the idea so much, Pillar's like, okay, now we got to make some changes. We're going to go back and kind of rewrite this whole notion of this mystery planet. So the old Academy friend is replaced by Data. And at one point, Picard is forced to kill a malfunctioning Data to stop him, only to realize later that Data was defending the natives from a worse attack. The whole Fountain of Youth idea is completely discarded, and we're left with a plot not nearly dissimilar from, like I mentioned before, Avatar, with Picard taking a stand to protect the natives from those who want to destroy their planet in order to harvest ore. Pillar's treatment, in my mind, reprinted in the book, reads really well. And I mean, it's only a rough outline, but it would have made an excellent film. Like I mentioned before, I think it would have been great to kind of see Picard kind of struggle with the Federation and the principles of the Federation and what they've turned into and the corruption that is inside of them. And then now you kind of see him younger. He probably is a little bit more livelier, a little bit more fun, as opposed to being old, serious Picard. So I think that would have been a lot of interesting things, to say the least. But as we know, it was rejected. But however, the second round of rewrites go to Paramount and about having with the whole Data storyline. And this treatment, they absolutely love it. Sherry Lansing, who was then the co-chairman of Paramount Pictures, said, hey, this is the most emotionally connected to any Star Trek storylines ever. I've never been emotionally connected to Star Trek, emotionally connected to this one. She loved it. And then we're like, okay, great. This is what we're going to go with. This Avatar-like thing without the Fountain of Youth, but it's just data is malfunctioning. And that's what we're going to get, right? Smooth sailing. We're done. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. We're not even there yet. Buckle up. So there was one more voice of the studio to be heard from, and it belonged to Jonathan Dolgen. And he was a chairman of Viacom. And he was actually the CEO at the time. As a rule, which is a very good rule, and I commend the man for this, is that Dolgen doesn't involve himself in any creative decisions whatsoever. He broke that rule this time because he was like, I'm not only care about the money and the franchise, I'm a huge fan. And I don't like this idea. He thought this idea of people being exploited for natural resources was very old hat. It's very TNG. We've seen it 15 times. And that Picard needed a bigger challenge. I mean, you think in First Contact, going back in time, saving the entirety of the human race, maybe you can just take just take a break, maybe just do something small. It doesn't have to be freaking save the planet X amount of times, and each time it gets bigger and bigger and bigger stakes. I'd much rather have had this Avatar prelude as opposed to what we got in Insurrection. I think a lot of people can agree with that. However, going back to what Dolgen said, he's like, he complained that the story was too much intellectualism. And he was like that it's just too many, it'll go over the heads of too many people. They're not going to get the themes of it. They don't want Picard to be perceived as being on the wrong side of an issue ever. So he was afraid that people weren't going to get the major themes and say, oh, Picard's fighting the Federation now. He's turned rogue. Which I don't think that would have happened at all. However, so as they were kind of Rick Berman and Michael Piller were discussing Dolgen's notes and how to respond, they received a call from Australia. And this was a call from the great Sir Patrick, or at that time it wasn't Sir, but the great Sir Patrick Stewart. And apparently, Patrick hated the story even more than Jonathan Dolgen. So the cat among the pigeons here in this whole story was Patrick Stewart. His response to the first stab of the script was that, and I quote, it has no surprises, it has no scale, it has little humor, and what it does have is cliched and tired. It has no romance, it's not sexy, it breaks no new ground, it underuses our cast, and it has little fun. It is dull. Well, just tell me exactly what you think, Patrick Stewart. Jeez, I mean, just ripping the dudes. And again, maybe, the late 90s, they were not ready for maybe a movie like this. And that's fine. But I think it would have done really well. Sir Patrick Stewart goes on. So, and when I say, how do we know Patrick Stewart, said this? It's because in the book, you actually see his notes that came through. So you see Michael Piller's notes from the phone calls, etc. And I didn't think he expected any of this to be published. So he was just writing so he can record, this telephone call, etc. So it's a really organic kind of record keeping in how we get this response from him. Patrick Stewart continues. He's like, do you know what dismays me most about this story is that it's dredging up the Romulans. And the Romulans are very unexciting. They're the bad guys. They're very boring. They're kind of behind the scenes, cloak and dagger. It's just not sexy, like he said. I mean, after the Borg, you go to the Romulan? I mean, who cares? And so from that, the Romulans were dropped and the rewrites continue. I just think it's funny because Stewart, corresponding with the producers, is reproduced full in the book. So and again, that's how we can say, oh, this is what Patrick Stewart thought, these phone calls, these notes, is because it's in the book. And he virtually hated everything about the original idea. And I mean, there could be some truth to that. Like a lot of the ideas, they've already been retreaded on TNG. And he actually provided specific episodes that said, we've already done this, moving people and defending natural resources and going against the Federate. We've already done this in A, B, C, D, and E. And so he provides an actual breakout of the episode. So to me, that proves that, Patrick Stewart, again, it's more than a paycheck to him. He is definitely a hardcore Trekkie, and he wants to protect the image of John Luke Picard and the franchise as a whole. So I appreciate that. So he's not, I don't want to make it seem like Patrick Stewart's a villain, because he's not. He's just, of course, anything should be scrutinized to the nth degree so that only the best product gets put out. So I completely understand that. In response to that, Pillar kind of tries to argue his case and eventually sees that the only way he's going to accommodate Patrick's notes and kind of salvage all their hard work, and most importantly, get the film into theaters by its release date, is to go back to this fountain of youth idea. And then when Berman calls Stewart, he barely gets that pitch out when Patrick just enthusiastically approves of the idea. He's like, yes, fountain of youth, let's do it. And to me, that's kind of where I'll leave it for now, because I know this book, like I mentioned, is a very long book, but that's really the Star Trek side of it, is that it went through a couple of rewrites and really cool storylines that would have been great for Star Trek as a whole, but they decided against it, and now we got the piece of crap that was Insurrection. And what was really neat about this book, Into Fire, was that after we see this first draft, they're looking to protect the integrity of the franchise and its mythology and make the best product they possibly can. And to me, most interestingly of all, is that they failed on every single one of those. This movie really almost killed Star Trek. It just stopped in its tracks. We are ending the silver age of Star Trek, as I called it. We had Voyager, DS9, TNG going at the same time at one point. We had the Star Trek TNG movies coming out. We're almost fatigued about seeing all those movies in theaters. So now it's done. And you may ask, well, why didn't all those problems with the script, why didn't all the problems with the development of this get fixed? And Pillar at the very end of the book talks about it. He pretty much says, in short answer, there's not enough time and there's not enough money. They were under the gun to try to get the movie finished and shot and edit all that stuff and to make that pre-release date. And they just didn't have enough money to do what they wanted to do, which, if those were your issues, not enough time and not enough money, you would lean back on a great script, like the one that Pillar originally suggested, kind of this Avatar-esque fountain of youth idea. And that's not what we're left with, and that's okay, but that's history. I think history will be kind to Pillar, especially as we kind of examine, 20 plus years after what could have been. I think history will be kind. But there are some, as we wrap up here, one more thing. I want to get into some fun ideas and fun notions of the book that were just really interesting to me. So number one was that Michael Pillar talks about his relationship with Brent Spiner, who plays, of course, Commander Data. And he says that Brent was not comfortable with me at all. He was extremely polite, but after discussing ideas with him over lunch, Brent leaned forward and said, hey, I'm kind of worried that you don't know how to write my character. And that Brent could only judge my contribution to the series based on the scripts he read that had my name on the title page as the writer. He had never seen Pillar's name on all those rewrites and the scripts that featured Data. And so he was absolutely right. He's like, he probably thought that because he didn't know how much I actually helped in the background and how much uncredited rewrites I did. And it's so funny because Pillar says, I had written some of Data's most memorable scenes, but Brent never knew it. And hats off to Pillar for being humble and just being like, hey, I'm not going to shove that in your face, buddy. I'm just going to let you think that and do better for you. And all the while, it's like, this dude literally helped create your character. And then one of the many rewrites they did, Rick Berman went home and told his wife, he said, I think Michael is starting to lose it. He wrote a scene today in which a llama pees on Beverly Crusher. If you haven't seen Insurrection, don't worry, that scene is not in the film. Also, a little fun fact. So the famous DS9 showrunner and producer, Ira Stephen Burr, apparently never takes off his sunglasses. So he has these kind of like iconic, almost bluish sunglasses that he wears in everything. And apparently he doesn't take them off unless he really hates your script. So, little word of warning there. The last little tidbit and fun fact is they wanted to create a role for Tom Hanks, and that this role was going to maybe replace almost kind of like a Barclay-esque type of character in the film. They decided, we're just going to cut it all together and not have that because it's just going to be too much money and too much, Tom Hanks isn't going to accept a role that's this small in a Star Trek film. But if you didn't know, Tom Hanks is an absolutely massive Star Trek fan. I think he said on an interview that he knows all of the TNG episodes by name, and he can like recite all of the TNG episode names. So I thought that was cool. But anyway, that has been a deep dive and kind of an explanation about the fade in controversy, about how Paramount banned it, didn't want it to go anywhere, how it got on the internet for free, and just what could have been on these fantastic scripts that Michael Piller wrote and his awesome contribution to Star Trek as a whole. So again, if you want that PDF, you can simply just like Google Michael Piller, that's Piller, and then say fade in PDF, and boom, you'll get it. Like 1,000 different websites have it. So it's not illegal or anything like that to look it up and read it. It's just be a big PDF. That's all. So please check that out. If you're an avid Star Trek fan, if you're an avid writer in any way, shape, or form, please check out that book and honor this man's life and contribution to Star Trek. That has been our episode. Luna, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. I was really happy to shine the spotlight on Michael Piller a little bit and kind of talk about this, what could have been scripts, and it's been a great fun and an awesome read. So again, highly recommend that. And as always, thank you all so much for listening and communicating with me on social media and talking about different episodes and scripts and stuff like that. I absolutely adore you guys. And I know there's been kind of controversy before in the past. A couple people have reached out, maybe starting Patreon, maybe having a paywall, and I'll never do that. You can have my my scout's honor on that. I'll never do anything that would allow people to pay for content like this. I'm just never about that. I'd rather do ads, rather do partnerships or something. Or affiliate programs. I'll never try to hide stuff because, and especially it's just, that's not cool. Like, a lot of people work very hard for their money. Now that people have a lot of money, why? I don't want them to go spend it on, something like a podcast, no. Spend your product money on watches. See what I did there? My Luna, the producer, is shaking her fist at me vehemently, like, don't say that. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. And again, watch out for our DS9 review continue. That will be happening this week. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, remember to keep your mental health strong. Keep it up there, kings and queens. We need you guys, and you're very valuable and needed here on this planet. So as always, second star to the right, straight on till morning.